My name is Elisa Robles, and I'm 29 years old. 3 days ago, I learned something about the man I thought I was building a life with, something so small on the surface, so easy to dismiss as just a joke, that it took being left alone at a gas station 50 miles from home for it to finally make sense. I'd been living in my apartment for 4 years by then. My name was the only one on the lease, always had been. When Stanley Wright, my boyfriend of 18 months, moved in after his lease ended, it felt natural at the time. He contributed $400 a month, which didn't even cover half the utilities, but I didn't mind. I made decent money, and I loved him. I told myself that partnerships weren't about keeping score, that this was what building something together looked like. Stanley's younger sister, Lena Wright, was 25 and lived across town. They were close in a way that sometimes made me feel like I was stepping into a conversation already halfway finished. Inside jokes, shared looks, sentences, they seemed to finish for each other without even trying. I used to laugh it off, telling myself that strong sibling bonds were a good thing, that it was immature to feel like a third wheel. Looking back, I realize how often I ignored that quiet, uncomfortable feeling in my chest because I didn't want to seem difficult. The trip to the outlet mall was Stanley's idea. A casual Saturday, nothing special. Lena came along because, according to them, it was supposed to be a fun day, and I was included because I was apparently so fun to shop with. Stanley drove my car, he didn't have one, and we joked, we talked, everything felt normal. Too normal, maybe. I didn't notice the way they kept glancing at each other, or how Lena smirked when I mentioned needing a bathroom break. We stopped at a gas station. I went inside to grab snacks and use the restroom. 5 minutes, maybe less. When I walked back outside, the parking spot where my car had been was empty. At first, I thought I'd made a mistake. I stood there scanning the lot, walking a slow circle, my brain lagging behind reality. Then my phone buzzed. "Gotcha. You should see your face, Ev. We're around the corner watching. This is hilarious." Another message followed almost immediately. "This is what you get for being boring. Lighten up." I laughed once out loud because it still didn't feel real. I texted back that it was funny that they could come back now. A minute passed, then 5, then 10. Each message that followed brushed aside my growing unease, reframing it as overreaction, as sensitivity, as me being the problem. Standing there alone, watching cars pull in and out while my phone filled with laughter at my expense, something in me shifted. Not anger, something colder, clearer. These were two grown adults who thought it was funny to leave me stranded and mock me for being upset about it. So I stopped asking them to come back. I opened a rideshare app, closed it, then called a taxi company instead. When the dispatcher told me it would cost $120 to get to the airport, I said yes without hesitation. As I waited, more messages came in, teasing, dismissive, confident. I'd still be there when they decided the joke was over. When the cab pulled up, I got in without responding. That was the moment I chose myself, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. The cab door shut with a dull, final thud. And as we pulled away from the gas station, I watched the fluorescent lights shrink in the rearview mirror. My phone buzzed again, in my lap screen lighting up with Stanley's name, then Lena's, then Stanley's again. I didn't look at the messages right away. I already knew what they would say. Variations of, "Where are you? This isn't funny anymore. You're being dramatic." Words designed to pull me back into the same dynamic where my discomfort was treated like a flaw. The driver asked if the airport was still the destination, glancing at me through the mirror. I said yes, and my voice didn't shake. That surprised me. Inside, my thoughts were lining up neatly, one after another, like pieces clicking into place. I wasn't running away. I was creating distance. Physical distance. First emotional distance soon after. As we drove, I finally glanced at my phone. The messages had shifted from smug to confused, then slowly to uneasy. Stanley wanted to know where I'd gone. Lena said I was taking things too far. I typed one reply, then deleted it. Explanations had never helped before. They only invited debate. At the airport, I paid the driver, thanked him, and walked inside with nothing but my purse and the clothes I was wearing. The next flight leaving was to Las Vegas. I didn't care about the destination. I cared about the direction away. I booked the ticket without overthinking it, the way you do when you already know a decision is right. While I waited at the gate, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my landlord. I explained briefly and professionally that I needed to add temporary security measures to my apartment. He didn't ask for details. He just said he'd send someone over within the hour. The second call was to a security company. I told them I needed overnight coverage and gave them photos of Stanley and Lena. When they quoted the price $200, I agreed immediately. It wasn't revenge, it was insurance. The third call was to my best friend Marcus. I told him what happened, every detail, my voice steady, even as the reality of it settled in. They left you 50 miles from home, he said, incredulous. As a prank, I replied, and they kept laughing. There was a pause, then quietly, yeah, I'll be there. Tell me what you need. By the time I boarded the plane, my phone was lighting up nonstop. I turned it off as the engines roared to life, the hum vibrating through my bones. For the first time that day, I let myself breathe. I landed in Vegas late that night, checked into a hotel, turned my phone back on. 152 messages, 34 missed calls. I didn't read them all. I didn't need to. The pattern was obvious. Confusion, panic, anger, desperation. Somewhere in there, they'd gone back to my apartment and discovered they couldn't get inside. Somewhere in there, the jokes stopped being funny. I sent one message to the group chat short, factual, final. You left me stranded as a prank. I found my own way. The apartment is mine. The lease is in my name. You do not live there legally. We're done. You can collect your belongings next week with notice. Then I blocked them both. I ordered room service, turned on a random movie, and sat there in a quiet hotel room that felt strangely peaceful. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty. I felt light, like I'd finally set down something heavy I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back to being the punchline. I didn't hear the knock on my apartment door that night. I didn't hear the raised voices in the hallway, the sharp edge creeping into Lena's tone, or Stanley insisting over and over that this was his home too. I was already thousands of miles away, sitting in a darkened theater watching acrobats twist through the air, my phone face down in my purse. At some point during the show, it vibrated hard enough to rattle against the seat, but I didn't reach for it. I already knew what was happening back home. I could picture it with uncomfortable clarity. The next morning, sunlight spilling through the hotel curtains, I finally checked my voicemail. There it was. Calm, official, carefully neutral. An officer informing me there had been a dispute at my residence involving a man claiming he'd been locked out. They wanted me to call back when I had a moment. I didn't rush. I made coffee, stood by the window, watched the city wake up below me. Only then did I return the call. The conversation was brief, polite, almost anticlimactic. I explained that Stanley was my ex-boyfriend, that he had been a guest in my apartment, that his name was not on the lease and never had been. Yes, he had belongings there. Yes, I was willing to arrange a time for him to retrieve them with notice and a witness present. No, he did not have permission to enter the property otherwise. The officer listened, asked a few clarifying questions, and then thanked me for my cooperation. The law, it turned out, was very clear on this matter. When I flew home later that afternoon, the security guard Dave, according to the badge pinned to his uniform, was finishing his shift. He looked almost disappointed to see me like a movie ending before the best part. He told me they'd shown up late the night before, furious and confused, convinced that if they just argued long enough, reality would bend to their version of events. He told me Lena had threatened lawsuits and Stanley had insisted he paid rent, as if saying it enough times would make it true. I tipped Dave generously and thanked him. He said it was the most entertaining shift he'd had in months. Upstairs, the apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Stanley's clothes still hung in the closet, his toiletries lined up neatly beside mine in the bathroom, his books scattered across shelves I'd bought years before I met him. I stood there for a long moment, absorbing the silence. This space had felt crowded for a long time, and I hadn't even realized it. That night, Marcus forwarded me the messages Stanley had been sending him. Accusations. Pleas. Wild swings between rage and self-pity. He claimed I was abusive, that I'd humiliated him in front of the police, that I was holding his life hostage. Lena's messages were worse, long spiraling rants, painting me as a controlling psychopath, twisting the story until the prank disappeared, entirely replaced by a narrative where they were the victims of my cruelty. I didn't respond. I boxed Stanley's things instead. Slowly, methodically. Not out of spite, but because I wanted this chapter contained, labeled, and ready to be closed. Each box felt like punctuation at the end of a sentence I'd been trying to finish for months. By the time I went to bed, I knew this wasn't over. People who refuse to see themselves clearly rarely stop when the truth confronts them. They escalate, they rewrite, they grasp for leverage. And sure enough, the next message came not as an apology, but as a demand. By Saturday morning, everything was ready. 12 boxes lined the wall of my living room, each one sealed, labeled and itemized down to the smallest detail. Clothes sorted by season, books stacked and wrapped, electronics listed with serial numbers. I wasn't taking chances, not with accusations already flying, not with emotions this raw. Marcus arrived at 9:30, coffee in hand, phone, fully charged, ready to be a witness. We didn't talk much while we waited. There wasn't much left to say. At 10:15, the elevator doors opened, and Stanley stepped out first, followed by Lena and their father, Richard Wright. Richard looked tired, like a man who already knew this was going to be unpleasant, and had shown up anyway because it was his responsibility. Stanley avoided my eyes. Lena didn't. She stared at me like I'd committed some unforgivable crime by refusing to play along. I kept my voice level, professional. Everything's ready. I'll help you carry it down. Lena scoffed immediately, launching into how insane this all was, how I was really doing this over a joke. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply corrected her. I reminded her that being abandoned 50 miles from home and mocked for over an hour wasn't a joke to me. It was a choice they made again and again, even after they knew I was upset. Inside the apartment, I stayed near the doorway while they checked the boxes. Marcus filmed everything quietly from the corner. For a few minutes, it went smoothly. Then Stanley froze, hands hovering over an open box. "Where's my laptop?" he asked. I told him which box contained it. He opened it, stared, then shook his head. "This wasn't the one he meant," he said. "The good one was missing. The expensive one." Lena jumped in immediately, accusing me of stealing it, her voice rising with every sentence. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and absurd all at once. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself beyond stating the facts. I had inventoried everything in the apartment. I had documented every item. If the laptop wasn't there, it wasn't there. Richard stepped in, then his tone firm but calm, asking Stanley if he might have left it somewhere else. Stanley insisted he hadn't, that I was lying, that I was punishing him. For 20 minutes, the same conversation looped in circles. Finally, Richard ended it. He told them to take what was there and deal with anything else separately. Lena glared at me, like this wasn't over. Stanley looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. As they carried the last box out, Stanley stopped and turned back to me. "We were good together," he said quietly. "You really threw everything away over one mistake." I met his eyes then finally. "You didn't make a mistake," I said. "You made a choice. And that choice showed me exactly who you are." Lena scoffed again, muttering something about me being too sensitive. I told them the collection window was over and asked them to leave. Richard nodded at me on his way out, something like understanding in his expression. When the door closed behind them, Marcus let out a long breath. We ordered pizza. We sat on the floor, surrounded by empty space where someone else's life used to be, and for the first time since the gas station, I felt certain. This wasn't chaos. This was closure beginning to take shape. The silence after they left didn't last long. By Monday morning, my phone, through a number Marcus was forwarding messages to, started filling up again. Not from Stanley directly this time, but through other channels, other voices, each one carrying the same distorted version of events. According to them, I wasn't a woman who'd been humiliated and abandoned. I was controlling, vindictive, abusive. The story had shifted just enough to make them feel justified in their outrage. Marcus played me a voicemail Stanley had left him. It was rambling, unfocused, swinging wildly between anger and desperation. One minute he was threatening to sue me for locking him out, the next he was asking how I could do this to someone I claimed to love. Lena's messages were sharper, more aggressive, accusing me of emotional abuse, insisting I'd traumatized her brother by embarrassing him in front of the police. It was fascinating in a bleak sort of way how completely the gas station had vanished from their narrative. Then came the email. It was long, dramatic, and full of legal-sounding language that didn't quite land right. Stanley claimed I'd stolen his MacBook, that I owed him $2,000 for emotional distress, and that I'd illegally evicted him despite his tenant rights. He gave me a deadline to comply before legal action would be taken. I read it once slowly, then forwarded it to a lawyer friend without comment. He called me 10 minutes later, laughing so hard he had to pause to catch his breath. The letter, he explained, wasn't from a real law firm. The formatting was sloppy. The threats were empty. Stanley had no case. None. The advice was simple: save everything, respond professionally if I responded at all, and otherwise let it burn itself out. I took his advice. Later that day, Marcus sent me a screenshot from a mutual friend's Instagram. Lena had posted a story, black background, white text, heavy with implication. Something about people showing their true colors about her brother going through the worst breakup of his life because his ex turned out to be a controlling psycho who stole his property. The comments were a mix of sympathy and skepticism. Some people remembered the prank. Some weren't buying it. The post disappeared a few hours later. That evening, I received a message I didn't expect. It was from Richard. He apologized. Not vaguely, not defensively, but clearly. He told me he hadn't known the full story until after Saturday, that what they'd done to me was wrong and that he was sorry. He said I'd handled the situation with more restraint than most people would have. I thanked him. I meant it. It mattered hearing someone from that family acknowledge reality. The accusations kept coming for a while after that, but they lost their momentum. Without my engagement, without a reaction to feed on, they began to collapse under their own weight. Lies need friction to survive. Silence starves them. By the end of the week, the anger had dulled into something else, desperation maybe, or confusion. The realization that no amount of outrage was going to pull me back into a story I no longer belonged to. And just when I thought it was finally winding down, Stanley tried one last thing. An apology. Sort of. Stanley's email arrived late at night, long enough that I knew before opening it that it wasn't going to say what it should have. I read it anyway, sitting at my kitchen table, the apartment quiet around me, in a way that finally felt intentional instead of empty. He wrote about thinking about missing me, about how everything had spiraled out of control. He said the prank had gone too far, that he regretted how things ended, that maybe if we talked, we could fix what was broken. What he didn't say mattered more than everything he did. There was no apology for leaving me alone at a gas station, no acknowledgement of the laughter, the mocking messages, the hour I stood there feeling small and disposable. Just regret that things hadn't turned out the way he wanted. I didn't respond. 2 days later, another email. Shorter, sharper. He didn't understand how I could throw away everything we had over one joke. He accused me of being cruel, of punishing him instead of forgiving him. Still no accountability. Still, I was the villain in his story. I didn't respond to that either. A week after the pickup, the missing laptop mystery resolved itself. Lena texted Marcus to say she'd found it at her apartment where Stanley had apparently left it months earlier and forgotten about. The message ended with a half-hearted apology. Sorry for accusing you, as if false allegations were just another misunderstanding to brush past. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The truth had arrived on its own. Life settled into something quieter after that. I changed the locks again, swapped out the temporary keys for new ones, and deep cleaned the apartment until it smelled like lemon and fresh starts. I donated the chair Stanley had brought and sold the lamp. I rearranged the furniture, reclaiming corners of the space I hadn't realized I'd surrendered. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for far too long. I went on a few dates. Nothing serious, just coffee conversation reminders that being with someone shouldn't feel like walking on eggshells. Work picked up. I got a promotion I'd been quietly hoping for. Marcus joked that the whole mess had been some kind of twisted catalyst forcing me to choose myself in a way I'd been avoiding. He wasn't wrong. I ran into Richard once at a grocery store. He asked how I was doing. I told him the truth, that I was good. He said Stanley was staying with them temporarily, that this whole situation had been a wake-up call. He admitted quietly that they might have spoiled their children, that Lena had a habit of pushing things too far. I wished them well. I meant it in a distant, detached way. People kept asking if I regretted how I handled it, if I wished I'd been more forgiving. The honest answer was no. What Stanley and Lena did wasn't a harmless joke. It was a test of how much I'd tolerate how easily my feelings could be dismissed. And when they realized there were consequences, they tried to rewrite the story instead of facing it. When they left me at that gas station, I could have begged, argued, waited. Instead, I left. Quietly, cleanly. I let their actions speak for themselves. They wanted to teach me to lighten up to take a joke. Instead, I learned something far more important, that love doesn't humiliate, that respect doesn't laugh at your discomfort, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away without screaming. Life's good now. Better than good. I'm planning a real vacation this time, maybe thinking about getting a cat. I move through my days without bracing for the next joke at my expense, without shrinking myself to keep the peace. They thought leaving me behind would be funny. I just showed them what it actually feels like to be left.